The metal pipe gave off a dull thwack sound as it slammed into the back of the man's skull, sending a crimson spray into the air. The crowd erupted, their cheers fueling the brutal assault. Instead of backing away, they surged forward, boxing in the staggering victim and almost shoving him back toward his attacker. The second blow came faster, smashing into the man's face, shattering teeth with an audible crunch. A sharp clap of hands sliced through the chaos, silencing the frenzied crowd. The air grew heavy. The only sounds were the labored, wet wheezing of the victim, struggling for each breath, and the ragged panting of his exhausted attackers. The crowd parted, and a man stepped into the makeshift ring they had formed. His eyes swept across the scene, locking on the man clutching the bloodied pipe. With a subtle nod, the man jerked his head over in the direction of the dirty pool of water sitting in the cracked concrete center of the plaza. The crowd exploded in a fresh roar. Their bloodlust reignited as the broken, bloodied man was dragged to the pool's edge. With a final heave, they hurled him into the murky water. His desperate gasps turned to frantic gurgles as two pairs of strong hands held him down. The man's body convulsed violently, his legs kicking in a frenzied rhythm that slowed as the fight left him. Then he fell still. The ripples on the water's surface the only sign of the violence moments before. This was prison life in Bolivia, and the act wasn't carried out on some secret, shadowy corner of the facility. It was done in broad daylight, and there wasn't a single cop in sight. Rough hands yank you from the back of the police van, your body stumbling forward as your boots scrape against the pavement. Blinking against the sudden glare of daylight, it takes a moment for your eyes to adjust. You're surprised to discover yourself in the middle of one of the most upper-class neighborhoods in all of La Paz, the capital of Bolivia. An enigma of a city, the vast metropolis straddles several peaks of the Andes Mountains. In most cities, the wealthy pay millions for the luxury of sprawling high-rise homes with commanding views from the mountainsides. But in La Paz, the roles are reversed. It's the poor who are forced to live high up, crammed into tiny tenements of dubious construction. The wealthy cling to their land the ancestors once claimed. Fertile river valleys transformed into an affluent concrete jungle. Surrounding the sanctuary of luxury is a sprawling ring of poverty, where some of the world's poorest people scrape by. And the dubious crowning jewel of upper-class life in La Paz is San Pedro prison, situated in the heart of one of the best neighborhoods in the entire city. The police shove you forward as you take in the view. Behind you are modern, expensive apartments and condos, but directly in front of you looms a massive wall, towering 60 feet high. Coils of rusting barbed wire stretch across it, while defunct and long-abandoned guard posts sit at each corner of the sprawling prison compound. Beyond those walls is a society of 3,000 inmates where every aspect of life is run by a civilization built by the most violent of Bolivia's criminal offenders. There are several entry points into the prison, but 3 of them are almost always permanently locked and only used for emergency purposes. But in the past, those same doors served another purpose. For the right fee and with the right cop at your side, they become discreet gateways for smuggling people in. This led to the prison having a booming tourist trade, with foreign tourists paying to stay a few days inside of Bolivia's most dangerous prison. Because now almost all traffic comes in through the front gates, the 4 cops permanently stationed there don't care about who goes in anymore, only who comes out. In broad daylight, you get pushed by armed police past a crowd made up of family members, visitors, and prostitutes. The receiving guards roughly pull you into a small office where they finish your paperwork. It only takes a matter of minutes, though there is some hang-up when they see that you're not a Bolivian citizen. It's only a brief hiccup, though. The American embassy already knows you were charged with a crime and sentenced to a year in San Pedro. Thankfully, the ambassador is trying to negotiate moving you to an American facility in the States to serve your time. But for now, you're stuck here. Once the paperwork is complete, you're surprised to find no prison uniform handed to you. Instead, you're given a brief pat-down. Your wallet remains untouched in your pocket, the officers barely sparing it a glance. The entire process feels more customary than anything else. The 4 cops manning the gate to San Pedro aren't concerned about what you're bringing into the prison as long as it stays inside of the prison. That is the official policy of the Bolivian state, who long ago gave up on the prison and instead left it to the inmates to run themselves. Low on cash, the move was publicized as a progressive prison experience, where inmates would be forced to care for each other and thus reform themselves. In truth, it's just that Bolivia simply can't afford to take care of the most populated prison in the entire country. Inside, it is anarchy, a lawless state within the heart of the Bolivian capital, and the police's jurisdiction starts and stops at the front gate. As it swings open and you are ushered in, the police officer doesn't follow. Instead, he gives you a push forward and quickly locks the gate behind you. You're bewildered. You've seen prison shows on TV before, but here, there's no inmate intake, no orientation, no briefing on the rules, no supplies given, no cell assignment, nothing. You just sign a document, the police confirm your release date, and you're shoved inside along with a throng of other visitors. But out of the 30 people pushed inside with you, only 2 others are inmates. The rest are sex workers or visiting family and even friends of the inmates inside. They come loaded with supplies for the inmates, and a lot of those supplies include merchandise for a flourishing drug marketplace. The cacophony of shouts, clanging metal, and the buzz of chaotic movement crashes over you as you step into the prison, threatening to drown out your senses. Then a sharp whistle cuts through the noise. You spot a man waving you down, beckoning you forward. He's surprised to see you're an American, but happy you can speak Spanish. He puts a hand on your shoulder and guides you deeper into the prison. There's an air of authority to him, though he wears no uniform, only an Adidas track jacket. But soon you spot others like him, all wearing similar track jackets. Inside a prison with no guards, the inmates run the show, and they've built a sort of legal system for themselves. These track jackets are the official uniform for the prison's enforcers. It's part of their job to bring fresh fish like you in and take them to see one of the 8 delegados, the bosses who run the prison. You get a quick breakdown as you go to see the most senior delegado, who's in charge of initial inmate screening. The prison consists of 8 neighborhoods: Posta, Pinos, Alamos, San Martin, Prefectura, Palmar, Guinay, and Cancha. Posta, Pinos, and Alamos are the wealthy neighborhoods, and entry into them is strictly monitored past sunset. Only those who belong or are on official business from a delegado are allowed in after dark. And if you aren't assigned to live there, you better be out before sunset. Each of the other neighborhoods has everything inmates need to survive, all built, operated, and maintained by inmates themselves. This includes laundries, restaurants, grocery stores, even gaming halls to play pool or video games. The supplies these places need to run are brought in from the outside by visitors. The state provides nothing for the prisoners except for one single meal a day made up of a watery soup. That means you're gonna have to earn your keep. The enforcer tells you as he hurries you along to an office area near the main gates. This is where the chief delegado works, though he lives in the most luxurious part of the prison known as La Posta. In the poorest neighborhood, known as the drug den, residents can live 8 or 10 to a single room. Many, however, simply lie on the cold concrete, huddling in between the crowded buildings for a scrap of shelter. But in La Posta, the chief delegado enjoys the luxury of a 3-story apartment, complete with a hot tub and satellite television. It's more cramped than an even small apartment in the real city outside of the walls, but it is large enough to be comfortable inside of the tight confines of the walled-in prison. Such construction has been undertaken completely by the inmates, the supplies brought in from the outside. There are entire teams of contractors even now who are working on a new building not far from the prison center. They are all inmates, including the electricians and the plumbers who will add the finishing touches. Over the years, the prison complex has swelled from the 250 inmates it was built to house to over 3,000 residents today. What was once a facility has evolved into a community, complete with multiple churches and a plethora of full-time businesses. You finally arrive at what's basically an intake interview with the chief delegado. It's an opportunity for the man in charge to show his face and make sure that new prisoners know who is the top dog. A drug trafficker on the outside, he hasn't missed a beat behind bars. With a cell phone clipped to his hip and a desktop computer connected to the internet, his business continues to thrive. He introduces himself, then he goes over the prison rules. There aren't many. Don't kill anyone without permission. Don't steal from anyone. Don't touch any of the women or children. That's right, the prison is overflowing with both women and children who live, work, and go to school inside the prison. Most of them are the wives or girlfriends of inmates who have had no choice but to follow their man into the prison complex. Bolivia has no social welfare programs, and it's even more dangerous out on the streets than it is inside the prison. The delegado continues. If you want housing, they have a real estate office set up where you can buy or rent a place to stay in one of the 8 neighborhoods. Many of the wealthier inmates will actually buy small apartments for themselves, and then they sell them at the end of their prison sentence. Just like in the real world, the real estate market tends to grow over time and property increases in value. Many turn a nice profit after a 10 or 20-year sentence. Most inmates, however, rent their cell, which can be either a spot inside a cramped room for as little as 3 Bolivianos a month, just under 50 cents, or a luxury apartment for several hundred Bolivianos a month. You came prepared, and you've got enough cash both at hand and inside a bank account to secure yourself a spot in one of the middle-class neighborhoods. You'll share a comfortable cell for the rest of your imprisonment, but it has its own bathroom and many modern amenities like a television and a bed. It's an incredible luxury for a place like this, but one that the delegado is happy to provide as long as you can keep paying the rent. When he asks what skills you have, though, he is pleasantly surprised to find out that you were trained as an electrician. Technical skills are in short supply and high demand, and in the eyes of the delegado, you just shot up exponentially in value. Not a bad way to start off your prison sentence in one of the world's toughest prisons. But you have no idea that there is going to be a price to pay for the favor you just garnered. The delegado negotiates a salary with you. The prison's electrical grid is completely operated and developed by the inmates, tapping into commercial power supplied by the city. Each new building extension needs its own wiring, and the electrical grid itself is in constant need of repair as it runs haphazardly across the sprawling complex. It's not uncommon for an inmate high on any number of drugs readily available to electrocute themselves on the exposed wiring. Your salary will cover your rent and provide money to buy food at the prison's grocery stores or restaurants. You basically set yourself up for a lower middle-class life inside the prison, and the delegado promises better opportunities if you prove yourself competent and stay out of trouble. He's always in bad need of skilled technicians, but they can be hard to retain due to the inherent prison dangers and rampant drug use. In a way, the delegado's entire operation starts to remind you a bit of a corporation, though one made up entirely of the most violent offenders in Bolivia, as you're about to find out. The delegado assigns you to a supervisor who you'll meet later today. But for now, he waves you off along with the enforcer who will show you where you'll be staying. The enforcer and two of his compatriots move you through the complex, and you note the number of children running around and playing in full view of murderers, drug traffickers, and more. Men and women freely and openly consume hard drugs next to groups of children playing. You can't help but feel bad for the next generation, as you wonder what shot at life they really have. There's several original buildings, and you can tell these by their age and construction. They're uniform in building materials and style, while the rest of the prison is a ramshackle mess of whatever materials could be procured. However, the original buildings are in a state of constant disrepair, given the century or so the compound has existed. And the entire thing has an almost post-apocalyptic vibe to it. You move through open plazas built to allow the population to socialize and into a mess of labyrinthine hallways and alleyways. You make a note to avoid those after dark. Violence is common despite the delegado's rules, and this includes stabbing and assaults. It rarely happens to women, though. One of the enforcers tells you it's usually men preying on other weaker men. Finally, you arrive at your apartment. "You got money for stuff?" asks one of the enforcers. "There's not much in the apartment except for what belongs to your roommate and a single empty bed." "Yeah," you nod, patting the wallet in your pocket. "You just made a stupid mistake." The enforcers take a quick look around. Confident nobody's watching, they shove you into the apartment and leap on you. They beat you, but they don't use any of the makeshift weapons they wear on their hip. Hands and fists, punches and kicks. Bad enough to hurt, but not to cause serious injury. Then they rip the wallet out of your pocket and take your cash before leaving you alone in the room to tend to your wounds. As an American, you had a target on your back the moment you walked in, but the men were jealous of how quickly you earned the chief delegado's trust and took such a nice apartment for yourself. Most of them live in another neighborhood, not in the poorest area, but in what would be called the upper-lower class. Violence is supposed to be sanctioned only by the delegados, but everyone knows it happens frequently and with little warning. You're lucky, though, because you're valuable to someone powerful, so the men only beat you enough to leave bruises and a split lip. Not bad enough to seriously hurt you. As you groan on the floor, you realize you have zero recourse. Who are you going to tell about the beating? The delegado made it clear that you don't go to the police for anything. You only come to a delegado or their enforcers. But what enforcers are you going to snitch on other enforcers to? It's a trap and a good lesson for your first day in San Pedro. You have no money, at least not on you. Your attorney helped you set up a special bank account before coming to prison, but none of the stores here take electronic payments of any kind. You'll have to get a hold of your lawyer to get some badly needed cash. Your first paycheck from your official job as a prison electrician doesn't come for 2 weeks yet. You'll be earning around 10 Bolivianos, close to $1.45. A decent wage here, all things considered. With the prison reliant on the skills of whoever gets sent through its gates, your abilities are both rare and in incredibly high demand. At least you got that going for you. But to get word to your lawyer, you'll have to rely on the messaging service the prisoners have set up on the inside and the outside of the prison. and they'll be expecting you to pay for it. So you'll have to scrounge up some money some other way. There are several loan sharks in the prison who will be glad to get you some emergency cash, but at a significant interest rate, and if you don't pay, they're not content with just beating you. They'll do that, and they'll put you to work to earn the money back. There's nothing you can do but wait for the one meal a day the prison does provide, so you sit outside your cell and you watch. Prostitution is abundant and obvious as drug peddling. Right there in the courtyard of your own neighborhood, children laugh and play in a grimy 4-foot-deep concrete fountain. Its filthy water is littered with discarded cigarette butts and scraps of trash. Just a few feet away, a heroin user leans against the wall, pulling a needle from his arm, his glazed eyes oblivious to the world around him. Two women, obviously prostitutes, walk new clients back to their cells, while other men who can't afford their services stare hungrily. You've been warned about watching your back at night. Even if your neighborhood is one of the safest, there's a risk of robbery, beatings, and assault. The soup arrives, and it's a mad dash to the front of the prison, where the guards have let the workers in with giant pots full of it. The guards themselves don't dare step inside the prison, though. At most, there's only ever 20 of them versus 3,000 inmates. Last time there was a major riot, the police were helpless. They concentrated all their efforts on making sure the prisoners didn't break through the main gate, firing tear gas and water cannons through the gate at the prisoners inside. The workers make sure that every inmate registered with the prison archives receives one bowl of soup. For many, it is the only meal they get all day. Unskilled prisoners are hard up for work, or they simply spend their money on drugs and sex. When you get your bowl, you realize it's mostly water with a few sparse bits of meat and noodles. Nowhere near the 2,000 calories a day the average person needs to survive. You don't know anyone yet, so you sit by yourself, which immediately puts predators onto your scent. You're obviously not Bolivian, which makes most people hesitate before messing with you. It's not fear of retaliation from the police, but from one of the delegados. You're probably useful to them somehow. Many American, European, and even Chinese who ended up in San Pedro are heavily involved in the drug trade. But there's also the fact that the delegados have a standing order not to mess too much with Americans or Europeans. They don't want the attention from governments who might actually put pressure on Bolivia to reform its prison system. You got real privilege here, and that makes a lot of people hate you for it. You decide to stick near the Adidas tracksuit jacket-wearing enforcers, and on your way home you stick to the sunlit paths as much as possible. On your way back, you pass a full-blown fight between two of the prisoners. A small crowd is cheering them on, and you can't help but cast a glance over at the enforcers. But the enforcers aren't prison guards, and this isn't a normal prison. Fighting is perfectly fine here, to a point. The rules are that you don't kill without permission from a delegado, and anyone well-connected or of special interest requires permission from the head delegado himself. But that rule is interpreted less as don't kill and more as don't get caught killing. You quickly learn that fights like this out in the open aren't the ones you have to worry about. If someone picks a fight with you in a public space, it's a pretty safe brawl. It's even encouraged by the enforcers to keep tempers cooler. Arguments are better settled with fists than with shivs or machetes in the dark corners of the prison. The guards can't control what happens inside, and largely the state doesn't care. But it seriously frowns on killing. That's why sanctioned murders are so rare and need delegado approval. But there is one type of murder that is always sanctioned, as you find out tonight. The fighters wail on each other until one of them is knocked down. A friend of his jumps into the fight, and this is where the enforcers intervene. A one-on-one fight is fair, but even they fear a full-blown riot the same way a regular prison guard does. To deter more violence, they disperse some of their own, lashing out with batons, canes, even their fists. Eventually, the crowd disperses, and the two combatants are left to pick up a few teeth off of the dirt. You heard there's even a dentist here, but while he uses regular dentist tools, the state doesn't provide any of the drugs for sedation or to fight off infection. That's fine though, because drugs flow freely into the prison via the hundreds of daily visitors. It's cheaper to buy the drugs here than in the rest of the country. Bolivia is a major producer of cocaine, and it has some of the best cocaine chemists in the world. Inevitably, they end up in jail here, where they continue to ply their trade. The lower class's drug of choice is cocaine paste. It's made up of dried coca powder with various chemicals to enhance and prolong the high. It's very powerful. Low-level drug offenders, often taken in for petty crimes like selling marijuana, end up powerfully addicted to hard drugs due to the quality and the abundance. You aim to steer clear of any drugs despite them being the preferred way to spend one's prison sentence. Making your way back to your cell, you finally get to meet your cellmate who has just gotten off his shift working on a building extension to the chief delegado's personal apartment. He's adding a 4th floor, which will allow him to be up above the walls of the prison themselves. And despite the obvious benefits from doing so, the state doesn't care. Your roommate goes over the basics of prison life, the same stuff the delegado told you about. He's glad to hear you'll be working in construction with him. Despite everything, he seems like a decent enough guy. You find out he's in prison for tax charges, which he claims were fraudulently levied on him after he refused to pay a bribe. You have no way of knowing if he's lying or not, but given the vast scope of corruption in the Bolivian government, it is a believable story. If it is true, it highlights the perplexing nature of San Pedro. Inside the same prison with absolutely no separation are murderers and drug dealers alongside white-collar criminals. Even first-time low-level offenders get thrown in here. The state makes no effort to separate offenders by their level of offense, simply throwing them all into the same prison and letting them sort themselves out. This inevitably leads to an explosion in criminal activity once the prisoners are released. Low-level offenders are introduced to powerful crime figures who take them under their wing. There's no social services in Bolivia, so a 1 or 2 year sentence turns into crime school, with low-level offenders graduating to hardened criminals upon release. They turned to crime because they were poor. They went to prison poor and they got out poor. There's no chance to break the chain at any step. The only thing Bolivia's justice system does is make better crooks. Night falls and you hear enforcers outside start to whistle loudly. Your roommate jumps off his mattress and waves you over. Something big is going on. The delegado in charge of your neighborhood wants everyone in the main plaza. Rushing out of your cell, you see a crowd already gathered in the heart of your neighborhood. On 2 sides are housing quarters, and on the other, a restaurant and grocery store opposite a large Catholic church staffed by missionary volunteers. The missionaries are nowhere to be seen. What you do see, though, is a man with his hands tied behind his back, being held by 3 enforcers. The man's face is already bruised and bloody, and through the swelling you recognize him as one of the prisoners who were processed in with you earlier today. Your roommate shakes his head in disgust as you join the crowd, which is now starting to hurl insults at the beaten man. You want to ask your roommate what's going on, but the delegado calls for everyone to be silent. Standing on a stepladder to be seen by all, he pulls out a sheet of paper from his pocket and he motions to the man. Carefully, he reads out the paper, a list of charges the man was tried and found guilty for by Bolivia's courts. One of the few court systems in the world where you are presumed guilty until found innocent. Murder. The victim was a young girl that he had assaulted first. The crowd roars in anger. The delegado scans the crowd as he finishes reading out the details of the crime. These were facts that should have been confirmed to the prisoner's official record, accessible only to high-ranking officials within the prison system. Yet, the entire neighborhood now knows about them. The delegado has to call for silence multiple times as the crowd howls in anger, the man staring dumbly down at his feet. "You know how we handle people like that here," the delegado shouts out. As if on cue, one of the enforcers pushes him forward and toward the concrete fountain where earlier today children had been playing. He swings with a short metal pipe, connecting with the back of the prisoner's head. The man staggers forward as the other enforcers fall upon him, beating him with their bare fists or various weapons. The beating lasts a few minutes as the crowd cheers its approval. Finally, there's a loud whistling, and the delegado claps his hands loudly to demand silence. Approaching the battered man lying in a pool of his own blood, he nudges him with his foot. The man groans slightly in response, still alive. Then the delegado turns to his enforcers and nods at the concrete pool. The crowd cheers again as the man is picked up by his shoulders and dragged to the pool. The crowd simply disperses after the man's death. Nobody even bothers to look after the body. The volunteer missionaries will retrieve it and alert the authorities, who will quietly remove it. There will be no investigation. The death won't even make it into the newspapers. State officials will simply shrug their collective shoulders and notify the next of kin. Cause of death? Accident. There's no official lights out or curfew or anything like that. In better neighborhoods, though, there is a restriction on people entering, usually shortly after sunset. With nothing else to do and your stomach still rumbling in hunger, you head back to your cell, grateful at least that you're privileged enough to afford a semi-private space with your own bed. The tourist trips have stopped. But would San Pedro have been on your sightseeing list? What's your take on this unique prison? Share your thoughts below. Now go check out what happens in the first 24 hours inside Japanese prison, or click this other video instead.